This time, Derby County heaven. Brian Clough takes them to the title.
'Cause I'll stay a wild rover forever and more.
Yes, hello and welcome to By Far the Greatest Team, a podcast in which football fans attempt the impossible to once and for all rank who is the greatest team of all time. My name is Graham Dunn, making the case as ever for Oxford United, and joining us, our data guru himself, it's Jamie Rooney.
Hi, Graham. Yeah, this is a really exciting one. Brian Clough, early Brian Clough, a bit like young Sherlock, young Clough. And what's brilliant about this is that we're going to have the opportunity, because we can go, whether this comes in, I don't know, but there's definitely the opportunity because the relationship starts in the late 1960s and goes on to become probably the greatest double act Britain has ever seen. And that was when Cannon and Ball won Opportunity Knocks.
Cannon and Ball, Opportunity Knocks. What a thing. I suppose Clough has to be Bobby Ball, doesn't he? But that doesn't feel right, does it?
No, I think you're getting right on his nerves. Rock on, Graham.
Cannon and Ball, blimey. Could have been West, could have been Little and Large, I guess.
It could have been. I wanted to be Little and Large, but unfortunately they didn't get together in the 1968 when Clough and Taylor came together.
Yes, indeed. So this is the first of a sort of a double-header episode. So this is what we're calling, it's a kind of Derby County heaven and hell, we're calling it. Now, the heaven, this is what we're doing first. And this is more traditional, classic, by far the greatest team fodder. But we are going to be doing hell the following week, which is going to be looking at a Derby County team, which you're not going to have any problem ranking whatsoever. But we thought if we were going to look at a terrible Derby side, we should look at the greatest Derby side. Well, in fact, whether they are the greatest one is debatable. But we are looking at Brian Clough's unbelievable Derby County League title winners. And joining us for both the heaven and the hell on this, welcome in Phil Craig. Hi, Phil.
Hello, Graham. Hello, Jamie. Looking forward to this very much. I've got to say, I'm just wondering who's going to be the first one to try out an impression of the said Brian Clough.
Right. It's gone through my head so many times in the lead up to this, but I just don't. I mean, I used to love doing impressions, but as I've got older, I think it's because everything was so generic. I just feel like I'm out of touch and I couldn't do that, young man. I couldn't do that impression.
Yeah.
Young man is a bit irresistible, isn't it?
It is. It's very stereotypical, but that is pretty much the length of my impressions. I can only do generic stereotypes, and that's probably why I don't do them anymore.
Now we're in our fourth season. Are we in the fourth season? We are. Now we're in the fourth season of the podcast. What I like is that when we invite guests on, there's always a kind of, or think about what teams people should do or who'd be a good fit for them. There is always a sort of connection because we've done enough teams already that we can connect things up. And the reason I thought this one would be an interesting one to have you on, of course, was you were on for Leeds United and Don Revie. And there is, as we will get into in this story, there is a whole Clough Revie thing which kind of underpins this Derby story, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's kind of played out, isn't it? In first the book, The Damned United, David Peace's book, dramatic novel based on fact, but also kind of quite controversial as well. We might kind of touch on, and then the film that followed, which was actually probably gentler on Clough, but includes that remarkable two-way interview with Austin Mitchell, with Don Revie and Brian Clough. And I mean, they were so confident in the ability of the actors to mimic the two football managers that they actually interspersed, I think, the dramatic with the real as well. And there's not a huge amount of difference. It's a brilliant piece of acting.
It is.
Yeah. It is absolutely quite something. We'll get on to this, and this story. We will talk a little bit about Derby and a little bit about the players, but we are going to end up in Brian Clough territory. It is almost impossible not to. Probably the beginning of this is Derby themselves. Jamie, before Brian Clough arrives, what's happening to Derby County? What kind of team are they?
I guess trying to put it in the nicest possible way, they were almost footballing nobodies up until Clough and Taylor's arrival. Founding members of the Football League in 1888, they actually had won the FA Cup in 1946, a very unique FA Cup. It was the first one since the Second World War had ended. Not every football team, the romance of having your non-league teams were unable to compete because they were still recovering from the aftermath of the Second World War. So the FA Cup had this two-legged affair through the rounds, and Derby County came through that, and they beat Charlton Athletic in the final to win the FA Cup. And that pretty much remains their only major trophy. They had won some lower league titles, and they mostly drifted in the second tier, occasionally popping up into the first tier. But before Clough and Taylor came to Derby, they were footballing nobodies. And I think I'm trying to be as nice as possible.
Yeah, so they're skulking all the way in the second tier at this stage. I think it's about 15 years or so out of the top flight. Phil, what about Brian Clough and, of course, Peter Taylor? I mean, where does Brian Clough come from?
Well, it's a return to the northeast, isn't it? Well, just about the northeast. So Brian Howard Clough, he was born in 1935 in Middlesbrough, made his way up through the local youth team, both with Billingham Symphonia and Middlesbrough himself. Went on to make his debut for Middlesbrough in the 1955-56 season. Middlesbrough at that point, as they are now, of course, were in the second division. Had a decent start in his first season, made 9 appearances and scored 3 goals. He ended up playing 222 games for Middlesbrough over the course of 7 seasons, and he scored 204 goals. It's remarkable to think that a player, I mean, even a player in the second division today scoring that amount of goals, practically a goal a game, wouldn't have been picked up by a higher league team. But it was even better than that, actually. It was even better than being kind of taken by what was then a first division team. His dream came true in 1961 when he joined the mighty Sunderland, unfortunately at that point in the second division. And he just continued his form from Middlesbrough, scoring practically a goal again. Interesting, just kind of we're thinking a little bit forward in terms of his managerial career. He was managed by a chap called Alan Brown, who was known as a very strict disciplinarian, and that might have influenced, I think, Clough's approach to management. Clough was famously once kind of told off just for talking to one of his fellow players. He was kind of taken down a peg or two quite early on, just a little bit, of course, for all big head. He still remained kind of quite confident until a match, and this is the kind of the key really to his transition from playing into management. It was a match at Roker Park against Bury on the 26th of December 1962. Sunderland were pushing for promotion, as they often do. And he was put through on goal, one-on-one with the Bury keeper, Chris Harker. 26th of December, little bit cold in Sunderland, not much sun around. Icy pitch, completely icy pitch, solid pitch. He goes tumbling over the keeper. You can see it on YouTube. His back was covered in mud. And in the process, he tore his medial and cruciate ligaments in his knee, which even today is a pretty big deal. It puts you out for going on for a season. In the end, he did return a couple of years later. He was out of the game, by which point Sunderland were in the first division, but he was only able to play 3 games, and he had to retire at the age of 29, having just played those 3 games in the first division, the vast majority of games in the second division. But the interesting stat, of the players who've scored over 200 goals in the English leagues, Clough has the highest goals per game ratio of 0.916, which is going some, isn't it?
Pretty good ratio. He was a special player, though, in terms of his stats.
It's a fascinating career, actually, to only play those 3 top-flight games. But he does play a couple of times for England as well, doesn't he?
Yeah, just two caps. I just find the whole thing, it's slightly baffling looking at it from today that a player with that goal record wouldn't have got the chance to play more games in the first division. You know, it's quite often said by players, by supporters in the north, if you're playing for a Sunderland or even a smaller team like Newcastle, that you sometimes don't get the chances that you should. Because you're out of the spotlight, but I think that was certainly the case, and maybe this was the genesis of his antipathy towards the Football Association and most people in authority as a result of that.
So with his career cut short, he starts on this managerial route, and he starts his career at... Now, I always thought it was just a Cloughism when he said he was managing Hartlepool's. I always thought, oh, it's Clough. That's just Clough talking madly. But it was Hartlepool's at the time, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Hartlepool's United.
Yeah, before the separation, as Phil will tell us.
Yeah, well, it was until the 1970s. There were basically two towns. There was West Hartlepool, and then the original settlement of Hartlepool, which was known locally as Old Hartlepool. So naturally, the two coming together, they played not as Hartlepool, but as Hartlepools, West Hartlepool and Hartlepool itself. I always tempted whenever we mention Hartlepool to mention the monkey hanger story from the Napoleonic Wars, but I feel it's unfair to mention it every time, so I'm just going to leave it there.
And it's a gamble on both parts, isn't it, when Clough goes to Hartlepool's, because Clough is only 30, he's not had any, he's completely untried. I'm not quite clear as to whether what Clough's persona was like as a player, whether he was as outspoken as he was, and whether his profile was as high as it was as a manager. I can't imagine it was. So Clough is a risk for Hartlepool's, but Hartlepool's isn't a very attractive job, is it? They're sort of perennial applying for re-election.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it was a risk, but it wasn't a great risk. At least Clough had some experience, not just as a player, but he'd done some kind of coaching with the youth team. Hartlepool's, really, I mean, it was year after year after year that we forget about this now. They would have been relegated and dropped down the divisions, but they would go for re-election. And I always found it, as a kid, I remember thinking at the time, wondering what the hell that was and why, having gone for re-election, they never dropped out of the division anyway. There was no kind of jeopardy in the old kind of Division 4. The club was in a pretty dire financial situation. They didn't have a huge amount of money, a little bit of a mess, but there was a little bit of a genius involved, and it's the kind of coming together of Clough and Taylor at this point. I think Clough and Taylor, at least for a short amount of time, had played together at Middlesbrough and had known each other. So Clough made the choice to make Peter Taylor, who was then manager of a non-league team, now a league team, Burton Albion. He gave him the position of assistant manager, and as they say, the rest is history.
He does all right at Hartlepool's. He steadies the ship and gets them. They finish 8th in their first kind of full season there. But in something which is to be an echo of what's to happen in Derby, there is a point at which the chairman, Ernie Ord, brilliant name, sacks Peter Taylor on the grounds that he doesn't have enough money to pay them. And Brian Clough refuses to accept it. So he sacks Brian Clough as well. And Clough sort of essentially refuses to go. And it goes to the board. And the board reinstate Clough and Taylor and sack the chairman, Ernie Ord. Now, this is a sort of brinksmanship, which it sort of continues pretty much throughout Clough's managerial career, arguably full stop, but definitely at Derby.
Yeah, it's not the last time that we'll hear about some brinkmanship with chairman and a certain degree of antagonism between manager and chairman.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think this is where the seeds are sown. This is where the dislike for the people running the game is born for Brian Clough, and it really never goes away. It's almost like he double downs and double downs and double downs, and and to his detriment, as we may find out talking through the Derby County portion of his career.
At the end of, I think it's the 66-67 season, Clough leaves Hartlepool and takes the job at Derby County. Now, Hartlepool's go on. They actually get promoted the following season, which kind of shows the Clough talismanic achievements. But he joins Derby County. Derby struggling second division side at this point. And he sort of quite quickly manages to turn things round, doesn't he?
He does. It's still probably quite a brave decision and quite a step up from what was then the 4th division to the 2nd division. The chairman, who, when I say his name, Sam Longson, I immediately now think of Jim Broadbent because of the film. But he hadn't long been, it's just in my head, he hadn't long been the chairman. And he was on the lookout for a manager. So he went and kind of, asked a few people. And one of the people that he asked was a chap called Len Shackleton. Now, Len Shackleton was somebody that my granddad told me all about as a Sunderland supporter. He'd started off at Bradford, took a misstep and played for Newcastle, but ended up in Sunderland in 1948. Spent just under a decade with the Sunderland team, scoring. What was he? My granddad would tell me all stories of him beating fullbacks and then stopping and waiting for the fullback to catch up with him, so he could kind of beat him again. He suffered an ankle injury, which kind of put a stop to his career. But then he went into journalism and he became a bit of an expert on various clubs, including North East clubs. And it was actually Len Shackleton who recommended to Sam Longson in May 1967, towards the end of the season, that he should take a look at Brian Clough. So the story goes that Longson gets into his car and drives up the motorway to the Scotch Corner Hotel. He's in his big Rolls Royce at this point, along with 2 or 3 of his fellow directors sitting also in his car. You're a little bit unsure about this big-headed manager who's only managed at Hartlepool, but they came together, and at this point they're getting on kind of quite well. Longson agreed to a £5,000 salary for Clough, with Peter Taylor as his assistant, and he made £70,000 available to fund player transfers as well. So, all good. I mean, it's not like Brian Clough will ignore what he says in terms of player transfers anyway, is it? So, yeah, well, it's all well and good for the next season.
Things happen sort of quite quickly at Derby. One of the things I like it, and when you follow this period of Clough, is that you have players that follow him around as well. We know there's players who play the Derby title winners that played for Notts Forest as well, the same side. But there's a couple of faces who follow from Hartlepool's. Probably the most obvious, or the biggest one of all, is John McGovern, who Brian Clough basically signs at every opportunity.
So 1967-68, second division, Derby, Clough turns up and he already starts to kind of put an impression on the club. So he was pretty ruthless. Only kind of 4 of the players that were present when he arrived at the club would remain. So there was the goalkeeper, Colin Bolton, the right back, Ron Webster, midfielder, Alan Durbin, another Sunderland link there, Sunderland manager, and also a striker, Kevin Hector as well, who was kind of going to be a bit of a legend at Derby County. What made me chuckle was when I read that he immediately kind of put his foot down. He sacked not just the club secretary, the groundsman and the chief scout. He also sacked 2 of the tea ladies for laughing after a defeat. And then he started to bring, obviously he'd had Taylor there already, and this is probably the start of him to kind of bring in his own people himself, quite often with a minimal consultation with anybody else, apart from probably Peter Taylor. Probably not discussing it with the chairman at all. This is probably the start of his emphasis on loyalty. Players and everybody in the club being kind of committed to his methods and recruiting trusted people that he liked. So, I mean, the first person that he brought in was a centre-back, was Roy McFarlane. He brought in from kind of Tranmere Rovers. So he's got an eye for a young player. Alan Hinton from Nottingham Forest also came. And John O'Hare as well was a player that he coached at Sunderland in the Sunderland youth team. So he's got an eye for kind of talent already, and he's bringing in a few of his players.
One of the things that signing McGovern allows Clough to do is to play Dave Mackay at fullback. And Mackay's a fascinating one because obviously there's you having brought in some youngsters. He's also there. You got an awful lot of experience. And in the following season, the 68-69 season, where Derby win the title, I think it's unbelievable. Dave Mackay is the joint Football Writers Player of the Year in 68-69, which actually is unbelievable. Really, looking at it now, that they would pick a second-tier player as joint winners. The previous Football Writers winner, I'll read them actually: Stanley Matthews, Bobby Moore, Bobby Collins, Bobby Charlton, Jack Charlton, George Best, and then 68-69, Tony Book and Dave Mackay. So, I mean, Dave Mackay is already sort of super well established. His credentials are well known and goes on to be obviously well known. But that bit of experience really helps get Derby over the line, doesn't it?
It's a brilliant signing because what he's bringing in is almost 20 years of experience, and he's got a young team there as well. And I think Clough brings him in for that purpose. And you're right, Graham, he plays in a deeper role that Dave Mackay hasn't played his whole career, where he can kind of see and read the game in front of him and just have that level of control. It's a brilliant signing. But there's so many similarities in terms of what we're talking about. You know, managers signing players that they've worked with all the time and that loyalty stands. Managers signing players that have had the best of their career but taking a chance on them. You know, Clough was doing these things like 50 years ago and they're still happening today. It's incredible. Some of the similarities are incredible.
I think the other thing I find really fascinating about this, and Jamie, you can probably talk a little bit about this, that when we start looking at the 68-69 season and the following on, their first one in the top flight for 15 years, the 69-70 season, there's already a TV documentary crew following Brian Clough.
Yeah, it's 1970. It's the season they get promoted into the top tier for the first time. And it's incredible. And I try to work out why they would be interested, because it's hard to find it. Sports Arena is this series of programs. I can't actually find it at all, but you can find bits of it on YouTube. And I think we've all watched it as well. And it is fascinating that Clough is at the forefront of this. And the only way I can kind of explain it is that we've just had the 1970 World Cup and it's in glorious colour for the first time. And you see the brilliance of Brazil. And I think football is slowly becoming this thing that more people are interested in because of the nature of what football is becoming and this glorious technicolor that's going on. But yeah, I mean, I don't think there was a football. We know there's football films. We absolutely do know there's football films before 1970. But I don't think there were many football documentaries. It's not exactly a fly on the wall documentary, because what Sports Arena agree, they call it a deal between the TV company and Brian Clough. So Brian Clough has already made a deal. And I think this also kind of speaks about his ego and his need for profile and his need for being seen and the adulation and the pats on the back and everything that comes good with being on TV on a regular basis. But it really is at the forefront. And what they agree is that they interview Brian Clough extensively at the start of the season, and that they will then interview him at the end of the season. And it's pretty contrasting, the two Brian Cloughs we get in the space of that 8-month season.
Yeah, I find it particularly interesting given how we know that Brian Clough is attracted to the attention and to the TV. And it starts really early on, and it's a kind of magnetism on both parts, isn't it? Because I think if you're the TV documentary makers who choose still relatively unknown as a manager, and you end up that you've got Brian Clough there, it's like a dream come true, a producer's dream come true, isn't it?
He's a very confident performer in front of the TV screen. And being a Sunderland supporter, I've seen pictures of him kind of going back to his playing days where he's been interviewed. So you can imagine that reporters, the TV and radio, are making a kind of a beeline towards him because he's always got something interesting to say. He's very kind of confident in the way he presents himself. And I also think, listening to Clough, one, it can be incredibly funny, but there's a great degree of simplicity that goes along with his insights as well. He doesn't overcomplicate things. He keeps it plain and simple, but kind of quite compelling in the way he explains it.
The first thing that's striking in the pre-season interview is how young and beautiful Brian Clough looks. He doesn't look a day over 25, and I know he's in his early 30s. I think he's in his early 30s when he's taking this role. He looks like a man with everything to look forward to. And he talks about confidence. Phil just touched on it. Confidence is a key message. It's like having confidence or instilling confidence into his players. But then you contrast that to the end of the season, and it's a different version. I think stress is introduced itself. Football stress has introduced itself to Brian Clough, and they're now one of the same thing.
But you also see lots of, throughout Clough's really successful sides, you see kind of mirror images of players. And I think Alan Hinton isn't a player I've watched a lot or knew a great deal about other than watching YouTube clips. But already he feels like it's you're watching John Robertson. There's this kind of, I don't know how similar they were as players other than playing on the left wing, I think. But Robertson seemed to take all their set pieces and penalties and everything. Hinton did the same. There are a lot of goals coming out from that side. And Hinton is Kevin Hector does an extraordinary job of scoring it. There you've got this great kind of one club man who just consistently scores 20 goals a season in the second tier, in the top tier, kind of throughout. But every now and then, Alan Hinton's involved in it, and he has a bit of flair about him. And Jamie, I know you'll love this.
I do.
Of course, that includes the white boots.
Yeah, there's flamboyance about this guy. Not only does he play in a very flamboyant, creative way, he expresses himself through his footwear. And he was one of only a handful of football players and one of the leading football players to wear football boots that were not a black colour. Yeah, white football boots. Alan Ball, I think, wore Hummels as well, white Hummels in the 1970s, and I think George Best may have flirted with it. But Alan Hinton, yeah, he's there in his glorious white boots. Well, in August, September, from late October through to April, they're more of a kind of a rusty brown colour.
Was it just me? Was the baseball ground? I mean, I know pitches are notoriously muddy, but I think the baseball ground. I really need a Derby County expert to.
There's a line in that Sports Arena documentary which I absolutely love when they cut to the postpart of Brian Clough, which we should get on and talk about. But the narrator who's pulling the whole thing together. So they cut to a shot where you've got this groundsman cutting the grass in its glorious green, and the narrator is like, pre-season, the baseball ground is looking in glorious splendor. The pitch is beautifully green. Come April, there is a blade of grass is as rare as a survivor from the Somme, and it's this mud patch of a pitch. There is no grass on this pitch, and the mud is clearly on Alan Hinton's beautiful white football boots.
Wasn't he also paid to wear the boots as well? So kind of, again, a bit of a modern reference, something we kind of take for granted now. But I think there was a couple of things with Alan Hinton. I thought there was his blonde perm. He had a lovely blonde perm. The white boots. But I think
what's not to like about this guy?
Yeah, I know. The white boots, which he was paid £1,000. And I think a typical kind of house, a kind of normal kind of house would have been about £2,000. So that was kind of quite a big deal. The other thing I only kind of came to Alan Hinton kind of quite late, and it's kind of going slightly off piece, but he did, of course, play later in his career for a short time for the Dallas Tornadoes, didn't he?
Good, well remembered. He had a spell in the US.
Unbelievably, both Alan Hinton and John O'Hare do play for Dallas Tornado, which is just a thing of beauty. After the break, we will get into the top flight season and a few of the other aspects. But we should just, in this first season in the top flight, Derby finished fourth, and a really creditable fourth place. And they qualified for Europe as a result. But Jamie, do they play in Europe?
They qualify for Europe, but no, they are banned for what the internet tells me for financial irregularities and payments made. The detail which I didn't dive into because I was more obsessed with the idea that their backup plan for not getting into Europe and being banned, which they qualified by right, was to be entered into the Watney Cup because they were one of the highest goal scorers in the division. So they rightfully won their place in the Watney Cup.
Okay, remind us. I mean, we're in season 4. We've not had a chance to mention the Watney Cup for at least a season, maybe more. What was the Watney Cup?
It's a short-lived tournament in the early 70s, 70 to 73. The Whatley Man Invitation Cup, which I think was the brewery. We've discussed that previously. And it was for teams that hadn't qualified for European competitions, but were the top 2 goal scorers in their respected division. So the top 2 in Division 1, the top 2 goal scorers in Division 2, Division 3 and Division 4, the Football League as it was back then. So you would have 8 teams competing, 2 from the top league and 2 from the second, third and fourth tier. And Derby County, they would go on and they would win the Watney Cup.
They didn't just...
You won't be surprised to hear that they beat Manchester United 4-1 in the final, which was the other top tier team. So none of the lower tier teams were able to make it to the final.
But this is a Man United with Best and Charlton and Law, I would imagine, in 1970. So it's a pretty good result. Am I right in also thinking the Watney Cup was the first competition to have penalty shootouts to decide drawn matches as well, at least in the UK?
The knowledge is great. You're good. Officially, it's the first penalty competition that takes place in English football. I think it was Manchester United played Hull, and I think George Best scores the winning penalty or the first penalty, or Dennis Law scores the first or winning penalty. I can't remember which order it is, but Hull City, Manchester United, the first penalty competition that happens in English football in 1970, 71, I think it was.
Can you imagine a Premier League manager today saying, having played, I guess in 1970, you'd had to play about 42 games, that you need to play some more games? Can you imagine a Premier League manager saying that?
Do you know what though? Because this happened I think it happened in the pre-season. So this is a precursor to what we get now. Some football teams go on a post-season tour just to top up the money when they fail to qualify for European competitions and they can't rely on that bankroll. But yeah, I mean, this is a precursor to the Audi Cup, isn't it? I mean, Tottenham Hotspurs would love that. I mean, Tottenham Hotspurs now won a trophy. So all jokes are set aside.
Okay, so Derby County have tasted some silverware at this stage, but the prize gets much bigger, and we'll talk about that in the second half.
Do you have a team in mind that you'd like us to cover? Well, just don't keep it to yourself. Let us know. You can get in touch with us across the socials on X or Blue Sky. Graham is at Said and Done, and I am at Couch Pundito. That's on X and formerly known as Twitter, and also on Blue Sky. Remember, greatness isn't just the big and famous. We love a cult classic, and we love a good underdog story too. And also, watch this space. Some new channels coming your way.
So welcome back. We're talking about Brian Clough's Derby County Heaven, the glorious title winners. So that first season back in the top flight, Derby finished a highly creditable fourth place. Jeremy, you were flagging the Arena documentary makers go back to see Brian Clough, and you can kind of see maybe the stress is taking its toll by this stage.
Yeah, the pre-season Brian Clough, it takes place outside, I guess, in glorious July, August sunshine, and he's looking at a picture of health. The post-season, which I guess takes place in late April, May, is in his office, and the phone is consistently going, and you can see it's irritating Clough. Yes. And the stress lines are showing in his face as well. And it's interesting where he's full of optimism and confidence and positivity and ambition at the beginning. And I think that's still there. But now he's been worn down a little bit by the football stress that is all part and parcel of the game. I think his disdain or his impatience for those that run the game, and particularly chairman, is slowly eaten away at him, and some of the frustrations. And I think we know from some of his frustrations that he would just bypass the chairman and make decisions on behalf of the club, non on the field decisions as well, as you've already alluded to, sacking tea ladies. But he talks about that he was smoking 30 a day before this season started, and now he's trying to stop that. And maybe he's replaced that with drinking, and we know that, it's not a secret. Later down the line, we know that Brian Clough suffered health issues with alcoholism. And it may have contributed to his death as well. But he's definitely finding ways to manage the stress, and the glory and the ambition he had at the start has definitely faded slightly as we see Brian Clough in the post 69-70 season.
Yes, and I think that following season, the second one in the top flight is perhaps, still quite impressive given where Derby have been, but maybe a bit more underwhelming. They finished 9th.
You're right. It was a bit of the 1970-71 season was a little bit disappointing, but I think Clough and Taylor were just filling in the blanks, seeing the weaknesses in the team and gradually filling in the weaknesses. So they needed a midfielder who could hold the ball well, pass, and maybe kind of chip in with a goal or two. So they identified Archie Gemmell from Preston North End, who eventually cost £60,000. Gemmell had a few options on the table, not just Derby, so he could have moved to Everton. And Everton were the reigning First Division champions, but Clough famously persuaded him to join Derby County by driving to Gemmell's house. And when Gemmell was a bit reluctant to sign for him on the door, he insisted on staying overnight. He said he would sleep in the car, but I think he actually slept on the sofa instead. And Gemmell joined Derby County, signed his contract that morning over bacon and eggs.
So Archie Gemmell comes in. Colin Todd comes in as well. Big signing. Colin Todd, who I think had played for Brian Clough at Sunderland's youth team.
He had. I seem to be getting lots of references into Sunderland without really trying very hard at this point. Yeah, but he was a member of the youth team that was coached by Brian Clough in 1965 following his injury. Got a big deal, the Colin Todd signature, when he joined from Sunderland in, I think it was February 1971. He'd cost Derby a British record transfer fee for a defender, which was £175,000 when he signed. Sunderland had just been relegated, so kind of picked him off. But Clough famously said the club were not going to sign Todd. They couldn't afford him. And then later that same day, they did sign him in that day. And he went on to play, he was there for 7 years at Derby, made 293 appearances. Before, actually, later on in his career, probably the highlight, I mean, he had a great time at Derby County, but probably the highlight of his career came later on in 1984 when he played 12 games for Oxford, I believe.
Indeed. That would be the highlight of any footballer's career.
Colin Todd, of course, was another example, I think, of Brian Clough signing a player for £170,000 and not necessarily telling the chairman or the board about it.
This is a theme. And I think this is part of the downfall of Brian Clough and his problems with the governors of the game, the people in charge of the football teams, or at least the custodians, and doing things without their consent. And it's interesting because he does talk about, he reflects on this, and something we could talk about when he's in an interview with David Frost in, I think, 1975. If there's an opportunity there, Michael Sheen, Frost and Clough, I mean, he's a similar kind of vein there in terms of Michael Sheen, who's played both of them.
It's impressive.
Films. But Clough talks about the importance of communication and communication with the people that are running football teams. And I think at this point, he's a little bit more mature, whereby in his early years at Derby, I think there's definitely a case that he's he's immature and he's still learning how to work with the people that pay his wages.
Yeah, absolutely. So that 70-71 season is something, as we were saying, slightly underwhelming, but everything kind of sets itself up. Worth saying that Dave Mackay, who's been on this journey all the way through, he leaves in 71, but he is to return to play a major part in the Derby County story that continues. But we head into that 71-72 season, and I suppose if you're looking for a sign that maybe it's going to be a good year for Derby County, maybe the Texaco Cup is the one.
I mean, this is a real collection. Derby County win the Watney Cup, and they go on and win the Texaco Cup as well. And just to remind you, Graham, I'm sure you've got this, the Texaco Cup was the American company, Texaco, who had purchased, I think Phil may have covered this as well previously, has purchased a number of petrol stations across the United Kingdom and were looking to promote themselves. So they put a big pay reward as well, £100,000 to the winner. And it was contested from teams, again, that hadn't qualified for Europe, from England, Scotland, Northern Ireland and Ireland. And it was called the International League Board Competition. Yeah, and there's Derby County beating the mighty Edrionians in the final to add a Texaco Cup to their Watney Cup.
Edrionians, yeah, in a thriller there. Well, so there you go. That's great trophy season. And actually, if you count the Texaco Trophy and actually Derby go on to have quite a long FA Cup run as well. They get through to the fifth round, I think, on that. So there's quite a few games that they end up playing in one form or another, isn't it, that year? But this is the season 71, 72. This is the season where it takes off. And we sort of touched on this on previous podcasts. This is a weird period of English football where sort of anyone is winning the league and seems able to win the league. There's this amazing run of 20 or 30, I can't remember how many years, I think it's 20 years or so, where no side retains the league title until Liverpool do it. And almost any team seems able to come from nowhere to compete and win the title. And you get a lot of names that are appearing almost from nowhere. And Derby are another prime example of this. I guess there's no real reason why anyone should think Derby County are going to be genuine challengers for the league title that year, is there?
Well, I mean, this is the era of Leeds United. So this is prime Leeds United. So, and there's a brilliant Everton team as well competing, and Liverpool are always there or thereabouts at this particular moment. In this particular season, there's a Manchester United team that are definitely on the decline, but have a pretty strong start to the season and look like they're going to be competing for the championship. And then, of course, there's Manchester City, who have won a championship in the last few seasons as well. So there's an argument that Derby County shouldn't even be finishing in the top four like they did 2 seasons prior to this season. But as you said, Graham, it's a pretty open league championship and quite possibly the closest league championship between multiple teams the English top flight has ever seen.
Yeah, I mean, this season has the most extraordinary climax to it. I mean, Derby start the season pretty well. They go 10, 11 games or so unbeaten without winning loads. And they're there or thereabouts all through the season, but they are in this, as you say, kind of epic four-way title battle with Man City, Don Reeves, Leeds United, and Liverpool. And it has the most bizarre end to the season, doesn't it? Because none of the teams finish at the same time. And the first team to finish is Man City, and they finish by beating Derby County. So Man City have finished their games, if I've understood this correctly. And they're above Derby, but Derby have one more game to play. And then Derby win their last home game. Is that right?
That's right.
Yeah, so you're right. City are top, and they finished all their games. Derby then beat Liverpool to go top and deny Liverpool going top of the league, but then Derby complete their games. However, that's on May the 1st. And a week later, Leeds and Liverpool both have games against Wolves and Arsenal, respectively, where both teams can still win the division.
It is a bit mad, really.
It's a bit close.
Because you would definitely banking on one of this Leeds and Liverpool sides. These are established sides. They should be able to get it over the line, shouldn't they?
Leeds need to draw. Leeds only need a point. 2 of the 3 possible results go in Leeds' favour and their league championship and league champions. Sorry, Liverpool need to beat Arsenal away to win the championship and hope to better Leeds United's result, which they do, but they don't win the league.
It's another example of Leeds. We've talked about this before when we were looking at Reeves Leeds, didn't we, about them just falling that little bit short, falling at the final hurdle. I think one of the reasons why they didn't all finish at the same time was that there was quite a lot of fixture congestion, and Leeds would have been going for not just domestic but also European honours as well. And of course, they run out of juice in the end. And like you say, they have 2 games and then lose it against West Ham, which means they can't overtake Derby. And that's another championship gone that could have been theirs. But my favourite little story, which I think is true, is that after Derby's last game on the 1st of May, when they beat Liverpool 1-0 at the baseball ground, Brian Clough and Taylor decide to go on holiday. So Clough goes to the Isles of Scilly and Taylor goes to Mallorca. So, there's no kind of sitting around the TV waiting for it all to happen. They went off days before the internet and everything else. They went on the holes.
Yeah, that is incredible. I mean, why wouldn't you? Their season's done. There's nothing left. They've had a long season. And as we discussed, Clough is finding the stress of football a regular visitor. So probably looking forward to the sun and a few beers in Spain or the Isle of Scilly with the family, which is really important to Clough. But, I mean, what's incredible, though, Graham, if we go back 3 games before Derby's final game.
Yeah.
So, after game 39, when Derby County actually do go top of the league, with Manchester City and Liverpool still to come, 2 of their rivals in the last 3 games, incredibly, Brian Clough and Peter Taylor quit Derby County and agree to join Coventry City. In what multiverse does this type of thing happen? Incredible.
It must have been some gamesmanship and brinksmanship over some kind or another. It does seem, even by Brian Clough standards, the most extraordinary timing to decide. It's not like he's not won other than the Tesco Trophy and the Watney Cup. He's not won. He's not won international or league honours as a manager before. On what planet would you think now is the right time to join Coventry? It's not obvious that Coventry are the side that everyone, it's not that he's kind of had his head turned by a glamour club.
Coventry City are a smokescreen. Brian Clough is a genius, a flawed genius, but he's also quite sensible in terms of like most people, he wants to have the financial security, and I think money is more important to Brian Clough than he lets on through his career. And we probably have learned that through some of his dealings with when he's been at Notts Forest. And I think he's holding out for a contract with Sam Longston. And I think the relationship is becoming a bit frayed between Longston and Clough. Taylor and Clough want a new contract. Derby County is stalling. Clough goes top with 3 games to go and decides this is the perfect time to play my hand. And it works.
There's a certain degree of brinkmanship as well. We were kind of mentioning the Colin Todd transfer, and there was no agreement with the board to set a British transfer record for a defender. But Clough just told the club secretary to, quote, put the transfer through and tell them later. And when Clough was challenged by the board, he said to them pretty bluntly, if they didn't want Todd, they could sack him. So this is the kind of continuation of a pattern, really, the kind of threatening the board, knowing that the board are going to kind of step back because it's Brian Clough. And why would you want to sack Brian Clough? He's on the cusp of kind of greatness. Derby have just won one FA Cup. There you are on the edge of greatness. Why would you sack him? Up to the point, of course, when, well, we'll find out later on.
It absolutely is that, Phil. And I mean, Clough knows that he holds all the cards. I mean, in the mid-1960s, before Clough took charge of Derby County, their average attendance was around about 14,000. Now, the lay stand was built just to coincide when Clough had taken over at Derby County, which a very expensive stand, £200,000, I think, at the time, which allowed the capacity to be increased. And through Clough, they're getting crowds up to 34, 35 average per season. They even topped 41 for one particular game or a couple of games in the early part of the 1970s. So Derby County are way more popular now than they've ever been in terms of the people that are coming through the turnstiles. And Clough is absolutely aware of this. And I believe his ego feels he's responsible for this as well. It's because Brian Clough's at Derby and doing the things he's doing that people want to come and watch Derby County.
It's definitely true. The Coventry, from the Coventry side, there's a whole story of them. They said, we've got to play Crystal Palace tomorrow, and then Clough was going to speak to Sam Longston, and we'll arrange a press conference for the Wednesday. And then, we just need another week, or two, and they're obviously being strung along. One of the interesting things of that Derby side, and it's not a team that I've seen a lot of footage of this side, actually. But there's a really massively consistent thread when you look at the appearances that go through. There's again, as quite often is the case with Clough teams, there's a consistency that goes throughout it. So Colin Bolton, the keeper, plays 57 games that season, but all 42 of the league games. The defence of Webster, McFarlane, Todd and Robson, they play all but a handful of games in that. McGovern and Archie Gemmell, again, they play 40-odd league games there. Kevin Hector plays every game. John O'Hare, 40. Alan Hinton, 38. So it's pretty much the same side every week. Alan Hinton's top scorer that season in the league with 15, and Kevin Hector gets another. Kevin Hector it's just this unbelievably reliable scorer of a derby over the years. It's just unbelievable. I think Terry Hennessey's almost the only other kind of bit part player who comes in. He plays about 17 games or so, but it's just a model of consistency, that squad, as I guess teams in the 70s, they did have much smaller squads.
You can't imagine Brian Clough going in for the squad rotation type principle. He seems to kind of keep it very simple, didn't he? Defenders defended. They cleared the ball. The outside forwards would beat the man, put the ball in the box. And there would be the job of the striker was to either get his head on it or his foot on it and score a goal. So it was kind of simple and well explained to the players. And, the players are just normal working class men, without talking down to the players. They need it probably to kind of keep it reasonably simple and straightforward. They were very clear in terms of their roles. There was no ambiguity, no doubt. And combined with the the strong relationship that they had with the manager as well. I think Clough was clearly a very good man manager. He had a pretty winning combination.
Clough was brilliant with praise. We see the fiery Clough quite a lot, probably more so towards the latter stages of his time at Nottingham Forest. But Clough was very good with praise, and it was important for him because I think he himself wanted praise. He needed pats on the back. And I think in turn, he reflected how he felt about that into his players. So he wasn't shouty and ranty with his players. I think he knew the capabilities of his players, and he was willing to praise them when they needed to be. He kind of got the whole idea of carrot and stick, and he was definitely more carrot than stick. I mean, it's hard to tell when you look at the early part of Derby County, I think they're playing a 4-3-3, but I could be called out on that, which would probably at the time would have been called more of a continental style. This is the type of style we saw Ajax, who were absolutely running football at this particular part of football history in the early 70s. And defence was a real kind of key cornerstone for Clough. He knew that by keeping goals out, you always had a chance of winning football matches, which is a very obvious statement, but not all teams play that way. So they only conceded 33 goals in the whole of that league season. That's 42 games. That's an average of 0.79. So it's less than one goal a game. But they're not massively outscoring their opponents as well. They score 69 goals, which is a goal average of 1.64. But 1.64 for 0.79 against tells me that's a winning formula.
I was just thinking that I think they were of the opinion Peter Taylor has spotted you for the team, and Brian Clough has bought you, and he's in the team. You're naturally a very good player. And then there'd be simple instructions, and then which were probably by the time you're getting into the 80s and 90s, there were probably new techniques coming in, and it was overrun. But that's a story for another day. But I think the other thing that he did was to kind of relax the players as well. So there's lots of stories of nights before big games that he kind of come in. He'd basically say, go to the bar, have a few drinks. He'd bring in a tray of drinks, have a drink, don't worry about it, just relax. So you'd be running out there, hopefully not with a headache, but you'd be pretty relaxed. You're confident, you're relaxed. You'd had a good evening, you knew what you wanted to do. It was a successful formula, I think.
He certainly wasn't willing to do the Don Revie approach of relaxing his players and give the boys a massage down, a soapy massage, which I think Don Revie was quite comfortable doing. Brian Clough didn't go that far.
No, imagine that. A massage from Brian Clough.
The other thing he does, it's not a solely Clough thing, but you do see it with other managers. But he has players that he goes on to rely on throughout his career. He has kind of go-to players who are instrumental in that. So we've obviously talked about him signing McGovern and Colin Todd and John O'Hare, all of whom he's worked with at various stages. All three of them join him at Forest, as does Archie Gemmell. And John McGovern joins him at Leeds, even in that tiny brief spell there. So you have these players who know Clough and know how Clough works, and Clough knows how they work. When you think of not just Brian Clough, but you think of, John McGovern wins two league titles as two of the least fancied teams in English football. if you set out and you say, I'm going to play a lot of my career for Derby and Notts Forest, you're not assuming they're going to win league titles.
Yeah. So McGovern was signed by Clough at Hartlepool United, then went to Derby. I think he was just 19 when he went to Derby, but then later joined Clough at Leeds for a short period, and then Forest, where of course he captained the teams that won the European Cup. And there's any number of other players there, the Archie Gemmels and the others, that kind of do something similar.
Clough signs him twice for teams in the second tier, and within a matter of years, he's won the league title with them. It's just, it is extraordinary. That doesn't happen in football, does it?
He probably had no choice, did he? Probably Clough was knocking on the door and wouldn't leave until he signed anyway. So,
yeah, John McGovern was definitely the precursor to Nemanja Matic becoming Jose Mourinho's player that everywhere he went as well. And why wouldn't you? What a fantastic footballer. But I mean, we talked about the closeness of this championship, where Derby win the championship with 58 points. And just for clarity, Leeds, Liverpool and Manchester City all finish in the following positions 2, 3 and 4 on 57 points. So there's 1 point divides, and it's 2 points for a win, just to point that out. 1 point divides the top four. So I haven't gone through all of the leagues. I think this would take some time. It's a project for another day, but I did look at the English top tier to see if this has been ever repeated previously. 1 point between the top team and the fourth team. And the answer is no. The closest I got was 3 points, and it happened twice. Once in the 1902-03 season, where the Wednesday, as Sheffield Wednesday were called, won the league, and Villa, Sunderland and Sheffield United all finished within finished 3 points. And then again in 74-75, Derby win the championship, as we're probably going to talk. There's also 3 points between first and fourth there. And even in the 38-39 season, where the Second World War interrupted after 3 games, there was still 2 points between first and fourth. So it just kind of demonstrates how ridiculously close this season was. And the fact that you have Manchester City on top of the league after they've played all their games and don't win it, and then Derby County on top of the league with Liverpool and Leeds still to play games to win it, probably makes it a fairly unique Football League season in any country, I would argue.
I can't think of a situation where we've had 4 teams like that. And again, if you think about what would Sky be doing for it these days, just
the whole purpose of Sky TV's football coverage is for this scenario to happen. It's what they dream of.
So Derby win their first ever Football League title. A legend is born. Brian Clough, understandably, is unbelievably popular at this stage in Derby. The following season,
there's something worth pointing out. The following season, the very first game, and I think this really demonstrates the rivalry between Brian Clough via Derby and Leeds United, Don Revie, because Derby as league champions and Leeds as FA Cup holders are due to contest the showpiece in August, the Charity Shield, now called the Community Shield. And both teams refuse to take part, potentially because they just don't like each other. And Arsenal had refused to take part the season before. So precedent has been set, and Derby and Leeds take advantage of that. And so they don't contest the Charity Shield based on the idea that they just don't like each other.
I think, isn't Clough in unusually some kind of contract dispute with Sam Longson, I think, is the reason. Which seems unlikely, doesn't it? I'm sure I read this. I think in 72-73, there was a couple of further pointers towards kind of the oncoming confrontation. The first was Derby signed the Leicester City left-back David Nish for a record fee of £225,000. And guess what?
Yeah.
He didn't tell the Derby's board of directors. And then there was a curious incident the following month in September where Derby had beaten Liverpool 2-1 at the baseball ground. And Clough, for some reason, was unhappy with the Derby County fans. And he stated, and here we go, this is my first accent. They started chanting only near the end when we were a goal in front. I want to hear them when we are losing.
They were a disgraceful lot. And he kind of followed up with his usual attack on the board of directors. And, Sam Longson understandably had to apologise to the fans and disassociate himself from the Clough's remarks the next day. But it's just another example of this kind of tension building up between Clough and the board.
It's not just that. It's Clough and the board, clearly, but it's Clough and Don Revie, and it's Clough and Leeds United. This is all building up to some kind of obsession with Clough as well. And the Charity Shield potentially gives an example of that tension between Clough and Revie that's building away.
I mean, shortly before he goes, doesn't Brian Clough, having been asked to stop kind of doing stuff in the media at this point, doesn't he write an article headline something like "Why Leeds United should be relegated"? Whilst I'm looking up Brian Clough exit stories, if I can find the bit I was looking for, because obviously at Forest, what Clough manages to achieve is to win the European Cup immediately after winning the league, and actually they do pretty well in Europe in that following season, don't they?
Yeah, they get to the semi-final of the European Cup, losing quite controversially 3-1 to Juventus. So they have a pretty steady progress on the way. Bit nervous in the first round. They win 4-1 in aggregate against Železnica from Sarajevo. Yeah. Yugoslavia then, now Bosnia. The second round is pretty remarkable, really. They beat Benfica with Eusebio playing up front, admittedly towards the end of his career, but still Eusebio. Quarterfinals, did well, 2-1 in aggregate, lost the away leg, but came back at the baseball ground. 2 goals from Kevin Hector, of course, to beat Spartak Tivana from Slovakia. But that's just the aperitif for the semi-final against Juventus with Zoff, Capello, Haller, Salvador. Yeah. They lost 3-1 on aggregate, losing. I think they lost 3-1 at the Stadio Comunale, and then drawing the second leg. But the real kind of controversy came because of one, Clough thought the Juventus team were overly physical and aggressive in their style, but his real beef was with the refereeing decision. First, that the derby thought the referee had allowed Juventus to play aggressively. Juventus weren't penalised, and they were penalised. I think Gemmell was suspended for the second leg. But then Clough also felt that the leg in Juventus was rigged. I think there was Helmut Haller was seen entering the referee's room pre-match. He was there to see the German referee Gerhard Schlerlingberg, and Brian Clough took exception to that, famously denounced both the referee and Juventus in the post-match interview, calling them, quote, cheating bastards, and saying, quote again, Juventus bought the referee. Of that, there is no shadow of a doubt. He continued to say it till the very end. In his autobiography, he said it's, quote, stank to high heavens. And, well, I can't believe that there would be any thought of corruption in Italian football in the 1970s.
So unlikely.
Yeah. I'm gonna spring to the defence of Italian football, potentially, but I think Brian Clough, as we talked about, with his kind of disrespect for people that run the football club, with authority, with Don Revie, he also had issues with referees. And if you go back to the Sports Arena documentary, he also talks down the qualities of referees there. He doesn't go in any specifics. You can't really watch the Juve derby first game in Turin. There's not enough footage on YouTube to watch it back. But I've read reports where there's nothing other than the 2 bookings, which causes the suspension of the 2 key players in the second leg. I don't think there was anything obvious. I think it may be just spring into the defence of Italian football. It could be just an emotional reaction from Brian Clough. But I don't know. The great thing is that Derby County are in a European Cup semi-final with Juventus, Ajax and Real Madrid. That is incredible. To even think that something like that could happen these days is just absolutely mouth-watering brilliant.
There's a great bit, I think it's in Brian Clough's obituary, which is written by Brian Glanville, who's at that press conference after the Juventus game, and who instructs Brian Clough, who speaks some Italian, I think, to go out and tell the Italian journalists what he said.
That's true. Yes.
So there was almost a glorious run, but by this point, it's evident that the relationship is turning increasingly sour and has gone beyond a working relationship. And the following season, I mean, it does seem extraordinary, but by the October of the following season, it has deteriorated to the point that Sam Longson sacks Clough and Taylor, which is the least popular thing that you could do. And, you know, you just couldn't imagine that situation today. You know, the players wanted him to be reinstated. The fans wanted him to be reinstated. There was a great piece which I found from about 4 or 5 years ago, which had a copy of the letter, which apparently Sam Longson had written explaining why he'd sacked him, which does make clear that his salary needs have been met along the way. And one of the things that him and Peter Taylor had fallings out over were around pay rises that Clough had got, but not necessarily Taylor. But in this, there's also what's described as Clough having given a Harvey Smith gesture of the V sign to Sir Matt Busby, which is considered the most outrageous thing, which Clough, I think, later said that he did do the V sign, but it was at Sam Longson instead.
Okay. It's all right then.
All forgiven.
But again, you're getting across it's this TV work, it's this media profile. There was that article he did write, an article which he got charged with bringing the game to disrepute for saying why I would relegate Leeds because of the way they play. Obviously, there's more to that story that follows, but it's become a sideshow, hasn't it?
He's uncontrollable. This is the issue. I mean, I think he reflects on this in the Frost interview that he's immature, and he's maturing as he gets through this experience. But at this particular moment, he's immature. He goes to Upton Park, West Ham, on his own accord and makes a £400,000 offer to sign Bobby Moore and Trevor Brooking. This has not been coordinated with the club. The club haven't signed off on these funds should West Ham accept, which Ron Greenwood didn't accept. Absolute genius, and what he's done with Derby County is amazing. But wearing the shoes of Sam Longson, I get it. He's uncontrollable. If you can't control it, you've got to get rid of it. And I think Brian Clough is the master of his own downfall.
It's nothing to do with the football either, is it? Because in 73-74, they'd made a pretty good start to the season. I think when everything came to a head, they were third in the table and they'd just beaten Manchester United at Old Trafford. But the tension was kind of building up, particularly with the chairman. I think there was an attempt by Clough and Taylor to somehow, if they could, eject Longson from his position, which was ultimately unsuccessful. Which
obviously goes back to what they attempted at Hartlepool. Hartlepool's and were successful in. So, you know, you can see there's a playbook that he is. And this is probably the first person who has ultimately kind of stood up to this iteration of Brian Clough, isn't it?
Yeah, it just kind of came to a head. And every other time that Clough and Taylor had kind of put in their resignation letter, Longson had kind of backed down. But this time in October 1973, he's not going to back down. He sees the opportunity to eject Clough and Taylor, which leads to the rivalry. We were discussing this earlier, weren't we? But that remarkable issue over cars as well.
Well, I mean, Taylor and Clough go into Longston's office and I think they know what's coming. They're given their P45s. They've been sacked. And then they leave, and then Taylor's invited back in and then offered the manager's job, which he declines on principle. I mean, they do come as a double act, and they are a very good double act. And then Derby County, Longston asked for the club cars back, which both Taylor and Clough refuse. To which then Derby County cancelled their insurance, which I think meets Clough and Taylor with a friendly episode with a policeman to just point them in the right direction that their cars don't actually have any insurance.
We obviously know, what happens to Brian Clough after that is a well-established story, albeit after a slightly underwhelming period at Brighton and then an extraordinary period at Leeds. And then obviously he kind of recreates the success he has at Derby, only greater with Notts Forest. But what happens to Derby is pretty extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, how would you follow a man like Brian Clough? Well, in this instance, they bring Dave Mackay back, and that goes remarkably well.
Yeah, I mean, it does. I mean, Mackay steadies the ship, and then the following season, 74-75, Derby County are champions of England for a second time. Incredible. It really is that this football team that I had labelled as footballing nobodies are now absolutely footballing somebodies, and they're on the map, and they remain on the map as well. And that continues, and Derby County have that legacy, that history that you know about them because they've won 2 domestic titles and they've also been to a European Cup semi-final. It's a big achievement for a team of the size of Derby County competing in the Midlands, where there's a lot of great teams, and sandwiched between the teams from London and the teams from the Northwest and the Northeast, of course, Phil.
Of course.
To Derby win the league title twice within a 4-year period. Different managers. There's obviously a legacy of the same players. Colin Bolton's in goal again. Colin Todd is kind of star at the back. Kevin Hector's still scoring goals. By this point, they got Bruce Rioch is quite a big addition, and Francis Lee's joined. And I think Dave Mackay plays with a little bit more. There's a bit more flair attached to the way that this Derby play. But it is an extraordinary achievement for a team like Derby to win 2 titles within 4 seasons, having not come close to doing anything like that.
And in an era where Leeds United are having their greatest period and Liverpool are just about to dominate English football. Well, they already kind of started that domination, but they go on to dominate English football for almost 20 years. I mean, it's happening at that moment, which makes it even more incredible that Derby County are able to win 2 league championships. So
we should get to ranking this team, shouldn't we?
We should, young man.
As a reminder, we have 5 categories of greatness. We have all-time greats at the top, true greats, our second tier category, touch greatness in the middle, edge greatness, and blinkered greats. Jamie, where are you going to put this side?
Yeah, tricky. I mean, I think we can rule out blinkered greats, and I think we can rule out all-time greats. After that, I think there's an argument for them to sit in tier 2, 3, or 4. It's really hard to talk about this story, Derby County 1970 to 1973, without talking about Brian Clough. And I think we've just talked about Brian Clough and not so much on Derby County. And we shouldn't forget as well, Taylor and Clough are probably in English football the greatest manager and assistant manager there's ever been. They are the yin to each other's yang. They do have a way of just making each other tick. It's a shame that Clough couldn't find a chairman in the same characteristics as Taylor, because I think it would have been a perfect formula. Clough even at this part of his career is an absolute visionary. He sees things on the pitch, he sees things off the pitch. He talks to David Frost in his interview in 1975 when he's come out of this whole Derby County experience, and he regrets it. He regrets leaving Derby. He doesn't say that in 100% certainty, but he says enough to tell you he regrets what's happened, and he wish he was the version of he is now at that particular point in 1975 when he left Derby in 1973, because he thinks he wouldn't have left. But he's also talking about things about educating footballers off the pitch and preparing them for a life outside football, because let's not forget the 1970s, when you're 32, 33, you were generally washed up as a footballer and you had to go run a pub or a garage. Let's not forget the great Bobby Moore, who lifted the World Cup for England in 1966, was selling cars and owning pubs in the early 80s because there was nothing that football gave him back once he retired. And Clough is kind of seeing that already and talking about educating players. So, like I said, I think this could be edge. I think this could be touch. I think this could be all time. So I'm going to play safe at the very beginning and put Derby County in a touch of greatness.
Touch of greatness. Phil, where do you go with this?
Yeah, I was thinking something similar, of touch of greatness. And we have, of course, talked a lot about Brian Clough, understandably, because when I was growing up and watching football as a kid, he was what kind of brought home football for me. It was always exciting to see him on a Saturday on St. and Greavesy or something like that. It was fantastic. We probably haven't said as much as we could have done about Peter Taylor and his role working with Clough, and particularly his ability to spot a promising player or to see an older player and the ability they could bring and how they would address problems in the team. There's quite a kind of telling quote that I kind of came across about Clough's relationship with Peter Taylor when he said, Clough himself said, and this is kind of quite humble from Clough to say the least, "I'm not equipped to manage successfully without Peter Taylor. I am the shop window and he is the goods in the back," which I kind of thought was kind of quite a nice way of looking at it. But there's one other person as well I just want to touch on that we haven't, which is Jimmy Gordon, who was the trainer that Clough and Taylor got involved at Derby in 1969. And he stayed at Derby until 1982. There's a couple of things that helped to kind of stand out. One, that he became caretaker manager after Clough and Taylor had left the club and held things together until Dave Mackay came in. And he was also slightly unusual because he did have a little break from being at Derby. And if you watch The Damned United, obviously Taylor didn't go with Clough, but he did. And in the film, he is played by Maurice Roves. And you'll see him in the background in the film as well. So I think it's kind of that the teamwork between Clough and Taylor, but also him as well. I think that's kind of comes through all the way through. I also noticed as well that the same actor who played him was a Romulan captain in Star Trek: The Next Generation as well, but that's completely off beam.
Add that to the collection of General Grievous for Star Wars.
Yeah, I am quite torn. I think it's difficult for Derby because to some extent, this glorious moment, this glorious manager who gives them this unbelievable thing, and then 6 years later, he goes down the road and does it at the club there, and only does it kind of better because he's there for longer and doesn't fall out with the chairman and becomes a legend there. And there's a whole kind of look at what you could have won element to it. I think this Derby side are a little underestimated, partly because there isn't much footage of them in the way that there are many other teams. In fact, even I think you see far more of the Dave Mackay Derby County than you do Brian Clough's Derby. So I think it's a little bit forgotten within that. So also, I mean, obviously, we have talked an awful lot about Brian Clough rather than the Derby players and the Derby team. But I don't feel too bad about this because early on in our podcast career, we covered Notts Forest, Brian Clough, in 20 minutes.
Yes, we did. We did.
And there's so much going on. You just could talk about Brian Clough forever because who else in amongst this drawn-out period? So I think on the 11th October, Sam Longson tries to sacks Brian Clough, and on the 15th, they finally resign. They give up on trying to do it. In between that time, he pops up on TV to produce his memorable Tomaszewski as a clown line.
Yes.
Arguably the greatest bit of punditry ever made, as he ripped apart the Polish keeper who single-handedly stopped England from qualifying for the 74 World Cup. But yes, I think we've done a few teams from this era. We've done the QPR side, came to glorious second place.
Yeah, also top after all their games had been completed,
but didn't get over the edge. And I think there was another side that we did who, for the same logic, I can't remember who it was. We argued that they didn't deserve to be in true grades because Newcastle. Was it Newcastle?
It was Newcastle.
Yeah, Newcastle.
They finished second.
Newcastle has since been relegated.
Yeah.
I wonder who did that.
Had to be done.
So both Newcastle and those QPR sides, we wanted to put them higher. That was probably based on their entertainment.
We put QPR in touch, and we put Newcastle in touch, and then somebody put them in edge.
Yeah. So if you put the team that finishes second in touch, surely you put the team that wins the league in true.
Yeah.
It's good logic.
I did say I'm open to all three.
I go with your logic.
Well, my final piece of logic as to why I'm going to suggest that we put them in true greats is that next week we're going to be doing Paul Jewell's Derby County. And so I think we owe it to the Derby County fans out there to say Brian Clough's Derby County true greats.
Brian Clough, did you know he has 3 statues? One with Peter Taylor at Derby.
At Derby, which I saw
One
the other day.
with lovely. He also has one at Nottingham Forest, which you would expect, and he also has one at Middlesbrough as well. 3 statues.
Very well deserved, I think.
There aren't many people that have played football and managed in football that will have 3 statues. Bobby Moore has 3, shared, I think, with Jeff Hurst on one of them because of the West Ham connection and the World Cup. I think Pele's got a handful. They're scattered all over the place. Cristiano Ronaldo has a statue, an airport named after him, and a museum. I mean, he really is banking on all fronts. But Brian Clough, 3 statues is incredibly unusual for anyone associated with football to have more than 1, definitely more than 2 statues in their memory.
It's good.
I love it. That's a good stat. I can't think of any.
Bobby Stoker's got a statue, obviously.
He certainly does. He certainly does. So before we wrap up, Graham, one question for you, and I don't know the answer. Derby County in the 1970s played away when they had a colour clash in the classic yellow shirts and blue shorts. Now, this was a popular thing in the 1970s. I know Manchester United had an away kit with yellow shirts and blue shorts. I'm pretty sure Southampton did as well. I'm pretty certain that Arsenal did. And I know that Leeds did also. It seemed to be a theme. And there are various reasons of rationale why this was the case. Colour TV was the birth of Colour TV. Not many teams played in yellow. Therefore, an away kit in yellow would always avoid a colour clash. And what I'm curious to know is, was it just one kit that they just shared between them? Because the 1970s, there wasn't a lot of money in football, so maybe they were just sharing this kit between them. But I don't know why. Yellow and blue, it was so popular. Even my primary school, we played in yellow and blue. We played our home games in our away kit, yellow and blue.
I think you've hit the nail on the head, is that up until the early 70s, there wasn't a top team playing in yellow and blue. Something changed as the 70s and the 1980s. By the time you get to 1986, there is only one team you think of in yellow and blue. And so that's ever since then, I think it's pretty obvious why teams have gone for more fancy and different grey kits.
I think on that note, Graham, we refer to another brilliant English double act, and it's good night from him and it's good night from him. I got that wrong. It's good night from me. It's good night from him.
Excellent. Okay. Well, thank you, Phil. Thank you, Jamie. Diving into Derby County and
mostly Brian Clough. Yeah.
But
Brian Clough.
Can I tempt you both back to talk about Derby County hell?
You can, and absolutely would love it. But do we need to do a second team? We might not fill the runtime.
We'll see. Okay, so we will be back with a Derby County Part 2.